Welcome back, everyone, to this new episode of BattleTIPS featuring the Beta Bases. Now, much like the Delta Bases, the Beta Bases are accessible through your Armory, and you can use gold to swap them out with your bases or add them to your set of cards because you want to. Now, these cards have equivalents in the Alpha Bases, which I'll make note of later on. However, unlike the Delta Bases, the Beta Bases have a pentagon, much like the Alpha Bases do. Certain attacks lose against other attacks and win against other attacks. However, unlike the Alpha Bases, it's very important to note that the pentagon for the Beta Bases is slightly skewed, meaning that instead of one base winning against two and losing against two others, one base wins against one and loses against three, while another base wins against three and only loses against one. Now remember, when I'm talking about the pentagon, all of these assumptions are with the fact that you and the opponent are at range 1 and have enough space to retreat and advance like 2 or 3 spaces behind you. Because a lot of these bases have to have that control in order to make the pentagon make sense. Now, without further ado, let's start off with counter. It's your alternative to strike, and it's arguably a better version of strike that's slower but has hit confirm and soak. But as strong as it seems, it actually is the worst base in the set. It loses to 3 other bases, and it only wins against 1. It loses to Wave because Wave can retreat more than it can advance. It loses to Force because Force is faster in it and ignores the stun guard. And then it also loses to Spike because Spike is faster than it and Spike will make you miss. On the other hand, it only wins against Throw because Throw can only move you back so much, and the before activating Advance lets you get in and whack opponents in the face. Now, what's funny about this card is that it's really good on almost everyone. Speedsters, Brawlers, anything, because of the huge amount of soak and stun guard it gives. In fact, if you have any style that gives you before activating advance 1 space, or any style that gives you range plus 0 to 1, it is amazing. With range 1 to 3 and like just 4 power, it's just way too good. Which is why this base was nerfed. Originally, it let you advance 1 or 2 spaces before activating, and that was too good for almost any character with any form of hit confirm, so they had to tone it down, even at the cost of the game's original pentagon, which is why the pentagon for the Beta Bases is skewed. Regardless, I would oftentimes just swap it out with Strike, because without a doubt, it's almost always just better in that case. Next up is Wave. Wave is your alternative to Shot, and it's arguably the strongest base in this set. Due to the nerf of Counter, Wave, which originally used to lose to Counter, now wins against it. This lets Wave beat 3 bases, but at the same time only lose to 1. So there's a high chance that you'll win the trade if you play this card. Now, it wins against Counter because, like I said, it lets you retreat out of Counter's range. Spike and Force lose against it because, well, you can retreat out of their range and then hit them faster than they can hit you. But at the same time, Wave loses to Throw because Throw is faster than Wave. Without a doubt, this is a very, very powerful card. In fact, you might compare it to Alpha Base's Drive from time to time because of the fact that it gives you almost the same hit confirm range with the same power and priority. In that sense, anybody who has moderately fast attack speed or has moderate range and or stun guard values can and will make effective use of this base. Now, I wouldn't necessarily trade it out for Shot all the time because remember, Shot is more for a long-range game and this is more for a melee to mid-range kind of game plan. Because of the fact that it's a mandatory retreat, you won't get as far with this base as you can with Shot. So keep that in mind and use your Wave very, very judiciously. Now, Throw is your alternative to Grasp, and it's almost entirely similar to Grasp with the same power, speed, and priority. In fact, the on-hit effect is almost virtually the same, with the main distinction of the fact that when you pull the opponent, he won't be at range 1 from you. This is very good, especially if your opponent has backed himself into the corner, so that you can still pull him 2 spaces to make sure that he's 1 space away from you, which is very, very crucial if the opponent is using a melee-oriented attack. Now, it wins against Wave and Force simply because it's faster, but loses to Spike and Counter because of Spike's ability to dodge it, then make it miss, and counters huge amounts of stun guard and hit confirm. Regardless, this is basically like grass. If you're any character that's fast that has decent hit confirm or power values, you'll really love this. So it's really a brawler type of base, and if you're a brawler, I highly recommend it putting in your kit because oftentimes it's better than Grasp. Next up is Force, which is our drive alternative. Now, this is a very powerful base because it lets you get in during start of beat, which is very good because it basically allows you to get in even if your opponent is faster than you, which is very good since the beta bases are all about movement and positioning. Now, this beats Counter and Spike. Counter because you ignore the stun guard and you stun them, and Spike because when they do their movement, you can then retaliate by advancing since their start of beat move happens before yours. But remember, any shifts in priority will change that dynamic entirely. But at the same time, it loses to Wave because Wave is faster, and it also loses to Throw because Throw is faster. It's as simple as that. This isn't necessarily a good trade-in for Drive a lot of the time. It's slower, and the start of beat advance might be good, but most of the time, it's a very clumsy kind of movement effect. Start of beat effects are oftentimes very clumsy when moving because if your opponent does something like a burst, well, that just ends up with you completely missing most of the time. So I don't highly recommend it, but if you're a character who's fast enough to take advantage of it, or a character that needs to get in almost all the time, regardless of whether the opponent can stun them or not, might want this card a lot. So brawlers and certain juggernauts might benefit from it very well. Not to mention, speedsters who have the ability to make them fast enough lets them ignore the stun guard on juggernauts who are slower than them. So keep that in mind. And finally, we have Spike, which is our alternative to Burst. Now, it might not have as much hit confirm as Burst does, but it has a very good on-hit effect that allows you to basically make the opponent miss. Now, it wins against Counter and Throw simply because you can dodge out of their range and then whack them in the face. And even then, they will miss regardless of how much hit confirm they have. On the other hand, Wave and Force both beat this card out because Wave is faster than it and Force is slower than it, meaning that you can advance into the minimum range of Spike. This is a very powerful attack, and I don't necessarily think that it's an instant swap out for Burst, but it's a very powerful card nonetheless. If you're the type of character that has enough speed to take advantage of it, or if you're up against somebody who's slow enough, you might want this instead of your Burst. Just be careful because you won't have as much ability to back off from melee as you want to. So some stuff happened and I lost the video for parry, so you guys are just gonna have to watch the cards for a while. Don't worry, my face will be back in a few. Finally, we have parry. Parry is our equivalent to dash, and honestly, it's not as good as dash is. It's incredibly not as reliable, and its only benefits over dash are the fact that, number one, opponents who are naturally faster can't negate the way this works because dash needs you to be faster and you can be stunned out of it. Number two, opponents that have abilities that prevent dashing, such as effects that make it so that the opponent can't move past you or switch sides, don't work on this. And finally, the movement effect is end beat as opposed to after activating. This makes it so that you can still make that movement even if you get stunned by the faster opponent. But aside from this, there is almost no benefit to using parry over dash, because it's incredibly less reliable as the effect basically is a toss-up. You don't know what priority your opponent will have, whether it's even or odd. Not only that, but it's limited by your ability to modify your own priority. So if you don't have anything that gives you +1 priority or -1 priority, you'll be stuck doing odd numbered attacks with parry all the time, meaning that you can't dodge odd number attacks from the enemy because you'd need an even number of priority in order to do that. So that makes it not reliable at all, and in most cases you're gonna get whacked. Aside from that, because of the naturally low speed on this base, which is just a measly 3, make note, strike has 3 priority, that means that you can't rely on it to even activate your before activating and after activating effects on some of your styles, as many characters would have effects that benefit them in some way before activating after activating. This means that parry is just almost never used, and I don't suggest it at all. No matter how well you are of a character that can manipulate priority. However, if you're up against an opponent who is extremely faster than you, or has a lot of can't switch sides with you effects, then maybe you can consider playing parry. Otherwise, I wouldn't recommend it. And that pretty much does it for the beta bases. Now, the beta bases are very interesting because in summary, the beta bases are all about movement. Many of the cards, actually almost all the cards in the beta bases, have some sort of movement effect on them, which allows characters to be way more mobile than they used to be. This is very interesting because the alpha bases were all about stats and number crunching. But this is about movement, which means that anybody with large amounts of hit confirm can take advantage of this base set very, very well. Aside from that, any characters who originally just had big stats but were lacking in movement effects suddenly become uniquely stronger because the threshold for movement effects is very odd. Basically, when you have enough movement effects, adding more movement effects on top of that doesn't actually make your character that much stronger. But if you were a character with barely any movement effects, then you suddenly gave them movement effects, the amount of power increase is actually huge. It's very, very big. For example, characters like Demitras, who already have a lot of movement on them, wouldn't really care about the extra movement from the bases because it just becomes redundant with what they already do. But think of a character like Hepzibah, who barely has any movement at all. But then you suddenly give her the ability to dodge attacks and get in more hit confirm. She suddenly turns completely insane because, well, one of her greatest weaknesses in the form of her lack of movement effects is now gone. So when using this base set and using bases from this set, remember that movement becomes way more important. And so, hit confirm becomes way more important. So that's 2 things to take away here. Number 1, characters that couldn't move before suddenly can move now. So be very careful about them because they might gain power spikes where you don't expect it. Number 2, characters with hit confirm basically negate the benefits that these bases give. So if you have enough movement on your own, or if you have enough range on your own, these bases basically are You can basically negate any of the bonuses they give to their players or the characters using them. So keep that in mind. I hope you all enjoyed this episode of Battle Tips. I'm going to be inserting a few other topics this week. I'm going to film a few more shorter videos than this that talk about selecting attack pairs and attack pair heuristics. It's a very interesting topic, and trust me, the Armory videos will still come, but I just wanted to add some more videos in between them so you guys don't just sit there and watch me talk about bases week after week after week. So, without further ado, that ends this episode. If you guys really like this video, we'll check in the description down below so you can find out more about beta bases, all the different kinds of bases. Heck, you can find out more about BattleCON, or you can look at Level 99 games and see all the other awesome games that they do. With that, I hope all of you guys enjoyed and learned something today. Remember, never, ever, ever forget your special action, and thank you, World of Indines. Thank you, and good night.